The knock on my door came at 11:37 p.m. 3 soft taps that I almost didn't hear over the sound of rain hammering against my windows. When I opened the door, Sarah stood there, her hair plastered to her face, eyes red and swollen, clutching herself as if she might physically fall apart if she let go. "David's gone," she whispered. "The hospital called an hour ago. He didn't make it through surgery." I stood frozen, the words hanging between us like a physical thing. David, my neighbor of 5 years, the man who helped me move in, who fixed my leaking sink last winter, whose booming laugh I could hear through the walls on game nights, was gone. "Can you stay here tonight?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "I can't be alone in that house. Not tonight. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to know this story changed my understanding of grief, friendship, and what it truly means to be there for someone. If this resonates with you, please consider supporting this channel with a like and subscribe. It helps these stories of human connection reach others who might need them. 3 months before that rainy night, David had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing to worry about, he'd told me over our shared fence, waving away my concern with his characteristic optimism. Just a little tune-up needed. Sarah had rolled her eyes behind him, mouthing, "It's serious," while he wasn't looking. David and Sarah Mitchell had lived next door to me for 5 years. They were in their early 50s, about 20 years older than me. When I first moved into the neighborhood after my divorce, they had welcomed me with homemade lasagna and a bottle of decent wine. "Everyone needs good neighbors," David had said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "We're glad you're here, Alex." Over the years, they had become more than neighbors. When my car wouldn't start in the dead of winter, David was there with jumper cables before I could even call for help. When I caught a terrible flu, Sarah appeared with homemade chicken soup and strict instructions to rest. They invited me to their backyard barbecues, their holiday gatherings. They were the family I needed when mine was too far away. And now David was gone. "Of course I'll stay," I said, grabbing my keys and phone. "Let me just lock up." Sarah's house, so familiar to me after countless dinners and game nights, felt like a stranger's home that night. The silence was wrong. David's absence was a presence in itself, hovering in every corner. I made tea while Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Her hands trembled when I placed the mug in front of her. "He was supposed to come home tomorrow," she said. "I already changed the sheets on our bed. I bought his favorite ice cream." I sat beside her, not knowing what to say. What words could possibly matter in the face of such loss? "The doctor said there were complications," she continued, her voice hollow. "His heart was too damaged. They tried everything." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "What am I supposed to do now, Alex? How do I do this without him?" That night, I slept on their living room couch while Sarah took sleeping pills and retreated to the guest room. She couldn't face their bedroom. I lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle and creak, sounds that David would have recognized and named. "That's just the water pipes," he would have said. Old house talking to itself. In the darkness, I made a silent promise to my friend, would not let Sarah face this alone. The next morning brought the crushing weight of reality. Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, touching David's things, his coffee mug, his reading glasses left on the side table, his jacket still hanging by the door. "I need to call people," she said, her voice mechanical. "His sister in Colorado. His boss. Our friends." She picked up her phone, then set it down again. "I don't know how to say it. How do I tell people he's gone?" "Let me help," I offered. "We can make a list. I can make some calls if you want." She nodded gratefully, and we sat at the kitchen table making a list of people who needed to know. With each name we wrote, David's absence became more real, more permanent. The first few days passed in a blur of arrangements. The funeral home. The obituary. Choosing a casket, a task so surreal that Sarah broke down in the middle of the showroom, sinking to her knees on the carpeted floor. "He would hate all of these," she sobbed. "He always said he wanted to be cremated and have his ashes scattered in the mountains. Why didn't we ever put it in writing? Why didn't we prepare?" I knelt beside her, aware of the funeral director's uncomfortable hovering. "Then that's what we'll do," I said firmly. "David gets what David wanted." That evening, Sarah asked me to stay again. And the next night. And the night after that. I brought clothes from my house, set up a makeshift office in their spare room to work remotely. My presence seemed to anchor her somehow, and I couldn't bring myself to leave her alone in that too-quiet house. The funeral was on a Thursday. The community center was packed. David had been well-loved in our small town. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the food bank. He knew everyone's name at the local diner. Sarah stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had insisted on speaking, despite my gentle suggestion that she could have someone read her words for her. "David loved life more than anyone I've ever known," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "He found joy in the smallest things, the first tomato from our garden each summer, the cardinal that visited our bird feeder, the way our street looks after a fresh snowfall." She paused, taking a deep breath. "He wasn't perfect. He snored like a freight train. He could never remember to put the toilet seat down. He was stubborn about directions and refused to use GPS even when we were hopelessly lost." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the room. "But he was perfect for me," she continued, her voice finally breaking. "For 27 years, he was my home. And now I have to learn how to live in a world without him in it." I watched her from the front row, my heart breaking for her loss while simultaneously swelling with admiration for her courage. When she finished speaking and returned to her seat beside me, I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back so hard it hurt. After the funeral came the hardest part, the return to everyday life. The casseroles and sympathy cards stopped coming. People returned to their own lives, their own problems. But grief doesn't follow a convenient timeline. "Everyone expects me to be better now," Sarah said one evening, about 3 weeks after David's death. We were sitting on her back porch, watching the sunset, something she and David had done together almost every evening. "My sister called today and asked if I was feeling more like myself. As if that person still exists." I nodded, understanding. After my divorce, people had expected me to bounce back within a prescribed timeframe too. "You don't have to be better," I said. "You just have to keep going." "I don't know how," she admitted. "I wake up every morning and for a split second, I forget. Then I remember, and it's like losing him all over again." That night, Sarah showed me a box she'd been keeping under her bed, all the things she couldn't bear to look at but couldn't throw away. David's wallet. His wedding ring. The hospital bracelet from his final stay. The sympathy cards she couldn't bring herself to read. "I don't know what to do with these," she said. "They hurt to look at, but they're all I have left." "Maybe you don't need to decide right now," I suggested. "Maybe it's okay to just keep them safe until you're ready." She nodded, carefully closing the box and sliding it back under the bed. As days turned into weeks, I began spending more time at my own house again, though I still checked on Sarah daily. She was learning to navigate her new reality, paying bills that David had always handled, figuring out how to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom, eating dinner alone at their kitchen table. One evening, about 2 months after David's death, I came over to find Sarah sitting on the living room floor surrounded by photo albums. "I found these in the attic," she explained. "I've been avoiding looking at pictures, but today I wanted to see his face." I sat down beside her, and she showed me their life together, their wedding day, vacations to national parks, holiday gatherings, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the simple fact that they had been together. "Tell me about this one," I said, pointing to a photo of them standing on what looked like a mountain summit, their faces flushed with exertion and joy. Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. That was our 10th anniversary trip to Colorado. David insisted we hike to the top of this mountain even though neither of us was in shape for it. We were so sore the next day we could barely walk, but he said it was worth it for the view. For hours, we went through the albums, Sarah telling stories about each photo, laughing sometimes, crying others. It felt like a turning point, not moving on from grief, but learning to carry it differently. 6 months after that rainy night when Sarah knocked on my door, we stood together at the base of a hiking trail in the Colorado Rockies. In my backpack was a small wooden box containing David's ashes. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" I asked. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, threatening rain. Sarah looked up at the mountain path, then at the clouds. "David would say the weather adds character," she said with a small smile. "He never let a little rain stop him from anything." We hiked for 3 hours, the trail growing steeper and more challenging. Sarah led the way, determined to reach the summit that she and David had climbed on their anniversary. When we finally reached the top, the view was breathtaking, rolling mountains stretching to the horizon, valleys carved by ancient glaciers, a landscape that made human concern seem small and temporary. Sarah took the wooden box from my backpack and opened it carefully. "I've been carrying you with me these past months," she said, speaking to David as if he could hear her. "But it's time to let you go where you belong." With gentle movements, she scattered his ashes to the wind, watching as they danced away on the mountain breeze. Some of the ashes blew back, dusting her jacket and hair. She didn't brush them away. "Typical David," she said, laughing through tears. "Always finding a way to stick around." As we began our descent, the rain finally came, a gentle shower that washed the mountain clean. Sarah tilted her face up to feel the drops. "Thank you," she said to me as we carefully picked our way down the trail. "For staying that night. For all the nights after. For being here now." "That's what neighbors do," I replied, echoing David's words from years ago. She shook her head. "No, that's what family does." Back home, life continued its forward motion. Sarah returned to her job as an elementary school librarian. She joined a grief support group at the community center. She planted David's favorite sunflowers along their fence. One evening, almost a year after David's death, Sarah invited me over for dinner, the first time she had cooked a proper meal for anyone since losing him. "I made David's famous chili," she said as I entered the kitchen. Well, it was actually his mother's recipe, but he claimed it as his own. I found his secret ingredient list tucked inside an old cookbook. We ate at the dining table, which she had set with candles and cloth napkins. "I've been thinking about what's next," she said as we finished our meal. "David and I always talked about volunteering abroad when we retired. Teaching English or building houses, something meaningful." "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely happy to hear her making plans for the future. "I'm not ready yet," she admitted. "But someday, I will be. And when that day comes, I'll go, for both of us." After dinner, we sat on her back porch and watched the sunset, just as she and David used to do. The sky blazed with color, deep oranges and pinks fading to purple. "David used to say that no two sunsets are ever the same," Sarah said softly. "He said that's what makes them precious, they're beautiful, and they're temporary." I looked at my neighbor, my friend, and saw how grief had changed her. It hadn't broken her, as she had feared it might. Instead, it had carved new depths in her, creating space for a different kind of strength. "I still miss him every day," she continued. "I think I always will. But I'm starting to understand that missing him is just another way of loving him. And I can carry that love forward, even without him here." As darkness fell around us, I thought about that rainy night when Sarah had knocked on my door, asking me to stay. Neither of us could have imagined the journey that simple request would begin, a journey through grief and healing, through the darkest valleys of loss and up to mountaintops where memories could be honored and released. In the end, what Sarah needed wasn't someone to fix her pain or fill the space David had left. She needed someone to witness her grief, to walk beside her through it, to remind her that even in her darkest moments, she wasn't alone. And in being that person for her, I discovered something too, that sometimes the most profound gift we can offer another human being is simply our presence. Not our advice or solutions, just our willingness to stay when staying is hard. As the last light faded from the sky, Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. In the quiet darkness of that moment, I felt the invisible threads that connect us all, neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, heart to heart, and knew that this, perhaps, is what saves us in the end. Not the absence of loss, but the presence of love. In the months that followed, Sarah and I settled into a new kind of friendship, one forged in the crucible of grief but no longer defined by it. She started hosting monthly neighborhood dinners, continuing a tradition David had loved. The first time she did it, she placed his photo on the mantel and raised a toast to him. He would have hated missing a good party, she said, and everyone who had known him nodded in understanding. 2 years after David's death, Sarah decided it was time to make some changes to the house. "It needs to feel like mine now," she explained as we painted her bedroom a soft blue, a color she had always loved but David had vetoed. "Not that I'm erasing him. Just making room for myself too." She kept his workshop in the garage untouched, though. "Some spaces should stay his," she said. "Besides, someone needs to keep lending tools to the neighborhood." On the anniversary of David's passing, we established a new tradition. Instead of visiting his grave, there wasn't one, after all, we would do something that celebrated life, something David would have enjoyed. The first year, we went fishing at his favorite lake. The second, we volunteered at the Little League field where he had coached. The third, we took a cooking class to learn how to make authentic Italian pasta, something he had always wanted to try. Grief changes shape, Sarah told me on the 4th anniversary as we hiked a local trail. It doesn't get smaller, exactly. You just build more life around it until it's not the only thing you carry. 5 years after that rainy night, Sarah finally took that volunteer trip she and David had dreamed about. She spent 3 months in Guatemala, helping to build a school library. When she returned, she was sunburned and 20 pounds lighter, with stories that tumbled out of her like water. "I'm going back next year," she announced over coffee in my kitchen. "And I've been thinking, you should come with me." I was surprised by the invitation. "Me? I don't know anything about building libraries." She smiled. "Neither did I. But David always said the best adventures are the ones you're not qualified for." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Think about it. Life's too short to stay in one place." I did think about it. And 6 months later, we were both on a plane to Guatemala, ready to continue the work she had started. In the years that followed, this became another tradition, 2 months every year spent building something meaningful in places that needed it. 10 years after David's death, Sarah started dating again, a kind widower she met in her book club. The first time she brought him to a neighborhood gathering, she was nervous, watching everyone's reactions. But our neighbors welcomed him warmly, understanding that her heart had grown, not replaced what was there before. David would have liked him, I told her as we washed dishes after the party. "I know," she said, smiling. "He's nothing like David, which is exactly right. I don't want a replacement. I just want companionship for this chapter of my life." They married in a small ceremony in her backyard the following spring. During the reception, her new husband raised a toast, to David, who loved Sarah first and loved her well. I promised to continue that tradition. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. 15 years after that rainy night, I faced my own crisis when I was diagnosed with cancer. Sarah was the first person I called, my voice shaking as I shared the news. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said, and she was, arriving at my door with an overnight bag and a determined expression that brooked no argument. "You don't have to stay," I protested weakly. "Yes, I do," she replied, setting her bag down in my hallway. "That's what we do." Throughout my treatment, the surgery, the chemotherapy, the long days of exhaustion and fear, Sarah was my constant. She drove me to appointments, sat with me through infusions, made sure I ate when food was the last thing I wanted. "I'm just returning the favor," she said when I tried to thank her. "Besides, David would haunt me if I didn't take care of you." On my darkest night, when the pain and nausea seemed unbearable, Sarah sat beside my bed reading aloud from my favorite books, her voice a lifeline I clung to in the darkness. As dawn broke, she squeezed my hand. "We're going to get through this," she promised. "One day at a time." And we did. 20 years after David's death, our neighborhood had changed. New families had moved in, children had grown up and moved away, houses had been renovated and sold. But Sarah remained, a beloved fixture on our street, the keeper of its history and traditions. She retired from the school library at 72, but couldn't quite give up working with books. She started a little free library in her front yard, painting it blue and yellow, David's favorite colors. She kept it meticulously stocked with books for all ages, often including handwritten notes about why she loved a particular story. "Books were how I survived that first year without him," she explained. "They gave me worlds to escape to when this one was too painful." 25 years after that rainy night, Sarah's health began to fail. Her steps slowed, her vibrant energy dimmed. When she was diagnosed with the same heart condition that had taken David, there was a terrible symmetry to it that neither of us mentioned. "I'm not afraid," she told me as we sat in her doctor's office, reviewing treatment options. "I've had a good life. Better than good." "It's not over yet," I reminded her, taking her hand. "We still have adventures ahead." She smiled, the same smile I had come to know so well over the decades of our friendship. "Yes, we do. But when it is over, I want you to know something." She squeezed my fingers. "That night you stayed, it saved me. Not just from being alone, but from believing I would always be alone." "You saved me too," I told her, thinking of all the ways our lives had intertwined over the years, how her strength had taught me to face my own losses and challenges. "More times than you know." In the end, Sarah lived another 3 years. She saw her grandchildren graduate from college, welcomed 2 great-grandchildren into the world, and completed one final volunteer trip, this time to a coastal village in Thailand where we helped rebuild after a devastating typhoon. On her last night, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand just as she had once held mine. The monitors beeped softly, marking the slowing rhythm of her heart. "Do you think he'll be waiting?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought of David, his booming laugh, his generous spirit, his boundless capacity for joy. "I have no doubt," I told her. Probably with a terrible joke ready. She smiled at that, her eyes drifting closed. "Stay until morning?" she asked. "Of course," I promised, squeezing her hand. "I'll stay as long as you need." As dawn broke, painting the hospital room with gentle light, Sarah took her final breath, peaceful, unafraid, ready for her next journey. In the quiet aftermath, I sat remembering that rainy night 28 years ago when she had knocked on my door asking for comfort in her darkest hour. Neither of us could have imagined then how that simple request, "Can you stay here tonight?" would weave our lives together through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. In the end, isn't that what we all need? Not someone to fix our pain or shield us from life's inevitable losses, but someone willing to stay beside us through them. Someone to witness our grief, celebrate our joys, and remind us that even in our most broken moments, we are never truly alone. Sarah taught me that the most profound act of love is often the simplest, being present. Showing up. Staying. As I left the hospital that morning, stepping into the bright sunshine of a new day, I carried with me the greatest gift Sarah and David had given me, the knowledge that we heal not by moving on from our losses, but by moving forward with them, allowing them to shape us into people with deeper capacity for compassion, for connection, for love. And in that way, those we've lost are never truly gone. They live on in the people we become because we loved them. That night, I stood in my backyard and watched the sunset alone, thinking of Sarah and David watching it together somewhere beyond my understanding. The sky blazed with color, deep oranges and pinks fading to purple, unique and fleeting and achingly beautiful. Just like life itself. In the days following Sarah's passing, our small community came together in a way that would have made both her and David proud. The funeral was held in the same community center where we had gathered for David's service nearly 3 decades earlier. But this time, instead of the heavy silence of shock, the room hummed with stories and even laughter, a celebration of a life fully lived. Sarah's grandchildren spoke of her adventurous spirit, how she had taken them camping and taught them to fish, just like Grandpa David would have. Her colleagues from the school library shared how she had transformed the space into a sanctuary for children who needed one. Neighbors recalled her little free library and how she seemed to always know exactly which book to recommend at exactly the right time. I stood at the same podium where Sarah had once stood to eulogize her husband, feeling the weight of responsibility to honor her properly. Sarah once told me that grief is just love with nowhere to go, I began. But she was wrong about that. She found places for her love to go, into libraries in Guatemala, into the hearts of her grandchildren, into books shared with strangers, into quiet moments with friends. She taught me, taught all of us, that loss doesn't diminish our capacity to love. If anything, it expands it. After the service, we gathered at Sarah and David's house, now inherited by their daughter, for a reception. The place was exactly as Sarah had left it, with David's workshop still untouched in the garage and her blue bedroom walls faded but still beautiful. On the mantel sat photographs chronicling their lives, David's fishing trips, Sarah's volunteer work, their children and grandchildren, and yes, even a few of me and Sarah on our various adventures. As evening approached, someone suggested we all watch the sunset from the backyard, one final tribute to Sarah and David's daily ritual. We filed out onto the lawn, glasses of wine and lemonade in hand, and stood in silence as the sky performed its nightly miracle. To Sarah and David, someone said, raising their glass. Together again. Together again, we echoed, our voices blending in the gathering dusk. In the months that followed, I found myself struggling more than I had anticipated. For nearly 30 years, Sarah had been my constant, the person I called first with good news or bad, the friend who knew my history because she had lived much of it alongside me. Her absence left a void that echoed with memories. One evening, unable to sleep, I walked next door to sit on the porch steps of what had been her home. The house was dark, her daughter only visited occasionally, not ready yet to decide the property's fate. I sat in the quiet darkness, remembering all the evenings we had spent there talking about everything and nothing. I miss you, I said aloud to the empty house. Both of you. As if in answer, a porch light flickered on next door, at the house on the other side of Sarah's. A young woman stepped out, wrapped in a bathrobe, a baby cradled against her shoulder. Sorry, she called softly when she noticed me. Did we disturb you? He's teething and won't settle. I shook my head. Not at all. I was just remembering old friends. She nodded toward Sarah's dark house. You knew them? The previous owners? Yes, I said simply. For a very long time. She bounced the fussing baby gently. We only moved in last month. The neighbors told us they were wonderful people. The best, I agreed. Then, seeing the exhaustion in her face, I added, teething is rough. Sarah, she lived here, used to say that frozen washcloths worked wonders. Something about the cold numbing the gums. The young mother's face brightened. Really? I haven't tried that yet. Nothing else is working. Worth a shot, I said, standing to leave. If you need anything else, I'm just there. I pointed to my house. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "It's nice to know we have good neighbors." I smiled, hearing David's voice in my head, everyone needs good neighbors. A year after Sarah's passing, her daughter called to tell me she had decided to sell the house. "Would you like to come over before we start clearing things out?" she asked. "Mom would want you to have something to remember them by." I spent an afternoon in their home, helping sort through decades of accumulated memories. In David's workshop, I found the toolbox he had used to fix my sink that first winter. In Sarah's closet, the hiking boots she had worn on our trips to Guatemala. On her bedside table, a dog-eared copy of the novel we had been discussing the week before she went into the hospital. "Take whatever speaks to you," her daughter urged. "They loved you like family." In the end, I chose David's toolbox, Sarah's hiking boots, and a photo album that chronicled our 28 years of friendship. As I was leaving, Sarah's daughter pressed one more item into my hands, a small wooden box I recognized immediately. "This was on Mom's dresser," she explained. "There's a note inside with your name on it." Later that night, alone in my living room, I opened the box. Inside was a small portion of David's ashes, the ones that had blown back onto Sarah's jacket that day on the mountain, and a handwritten note. "Alex. Asterisk if you're reading this, I've gone to join David. Inside this box is a piece of him that I've carried with me all these years. Now I'm asking you to carry us both for a while. Take us somewhere beautiful someday when you're ready. Somewhere we haven't been before. Keep having adventures for all of us, asterisk. Asterisk thank you for staying that night, and all the nights after. You taught me that family isn't always blood, asterisk. With all my love. Sarah." I closed the box carefully, tears blurring my vision. "I promise," I whispered to the empty room that somehow didn't feel empty anymore. 5 years after Sarah's passing, I finally fulfilled my promise. I took a trip to New Zealand, a place neither Sarah nor David had visited but had always wanted to. I hiked to the top of a mountain overlooking a crystalline lake, my aging knees protesting every step of the way. At the summit, I opened the wooden box and released their ashes together into the wind, watching as they danced away on the breeze, becoming part of something larger than themselves, just as their lives had done. "Adventure completed," I said aloud, imagining Sarah's approving smile and David's hearty laugh. 10 years after Sarah's passing, the neighborhood had transformed almost completely. New families filled the old houses, children played in yards where others had played decades before, and life continued its relentless forward motion. I remained, now the eldest resident on the street, the keeper of its stories and traditions. The young family next door, the one with the teething baby, now a rambunctious 10-year-old, had become particular friends. They invited me for dinner regularly, sought my advice on home repairs, using David's tools, and listened to my stories about the street's history. One evening, as we sat on their porch watching the sunset, a tradition I had shared with them, the mother asked, "Do you ever regret staying in this neighborhood all these years? You could have moved somewhere warmer for retirement." I considered the question, watching the familiar houses bathed in golden light. "No," I said finally. "This is where my story is. Where their story is too." "Sarah and David," she said, nodding. She had heard me speak of them often enough to know their importance. "Yes," I agreed. "And all the others who have come and gone. We're all just chapters in each other's stories, aren't we? The trick is to make your chapter worth reading." 15 years after Sarah's passing, as I approached my 85th birthday, I found myself facing a difficult decision. My health was declining, making it increasingly challenging to maintain my independence. My niece in Arizona wanted me to move closer to her, into an assisted living community where I could receive proper care. "It makes sense," I admitted to myself as I walked slowly through my house of 45 years. "But leaving this place means leaving them too." That night, I dreamed of Sarah and David. We were sitting on their back porch watching the sunset, just as we had done countless times in life. In the dream, Sarah turned to me with that familiar smile. "It's okay to go," she said. "We're not in the houses or the street. We're in the stories. In the love. You'll take us with you." I woke with tears on my face but clarity in my heart. The day I left the neighborhood was bright and clear, a perfect autumn day with leaves turning gold and red on the trees that lined our street. The moving truck was packed, my house sold to a young couple expecting their first child. Before leaving, I walked next door to what had once been Sarah and David's home. The current owners, a family with teenage twins, had invited me for a farewell cup of coffee. "We found something when we were renovating the back porch," the father said, handing me a small metal tin. It was tucked between the boards, like a time capsule. Inside the tin was a faded photograph of Sarah and David on their wedding day, along with a handwritten note in David's distinctive scrawl, *, "For whoever finds this someday, we were happy here. Be happy too. *. I smiled through tears, recognizing David's sentimental nature in this small gesture. "May I?" I asked, holding up the photo. "Of course," they said. "It belongs with you." As I prepared to leave, the entire street came out to say goodbye, families I had watched grow, children I had seen born, neighbors who had become friends over decades of shared life. They lined the sidewalk as I walked slowly to my niece's waiting car. The last person to embrace me was the woman from next door, the one with the once teething baby who was now preparing for college. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small package into my hands. "Open it later." Miles down the highway, as my old neighborhood faded in the distance, I unwrapped her gift. It was a beautifully bound book titled Our Street, Stories and Memories. Inside were photographs, anecdotes, and messages from every family on the block, a chronicle of the community we had built together over generations. And on the first page was a quote, attributed to me, *, "We're all just chapters in each other's stories. The trick is to make your chapter worth reading." In my new home in Arizona, I placed Sarah and David's photograph on my bedside table alongside the book of neighborhood memories. Each night before sleep, I would look at their smiling faces and whisper, "Good night, my friends." And sometimes, in that space between wakefulness and dreams, I could almost hear them answer. On my 90th birthday, surrounded by new friends and distant family, I found myself telling the story once again, of a rainy night long ago when a grieving woman knocked on my door and asked, "Can you stay here tonight?" "And did you?" asked a young great-niece, her eyes wide with interest. "I did," I said simply. "It was the most important yes of my life." "Because you helped her?" the child asked. I smiled, thinking of all that had followed from that single moment of connection, the years of friendship, the shared grief and joy, the lives intertwined through decades of change. "No," I said softly. "Because she helped me understand what matters most in this world. Not success or possessions or even happiness, really. Just love and presence. Being there. Staying." As the conversation moved on to other topics, I gazed out the window at the desert sunset, so different from the one Sarah, David, and I had watched together, yet beautiful in its own way. The sky blazed with color, unique and fleeting and achingly beautiful. Just like life itself. And in that moment, I felt them with me still, not as ghosts or memories, but as essential parts of who I had become. Their chapter in my story had shaped all the chapters that followed, just as mine had shaped theirs. In the end, isn't that the most any of us can hope for? Not to be remembered perfectly, but to be carried forward in the lives we've touched, our love becoming part of something that continues long after we're gone. Sarah and David taught me that. And in sharing their story, our story, I pass that knowledge on, another link in the endless chain of human connection that binds us all together across time and distance and even death. That is how we stay, even after we're gone. That is how love endures. As my 95th birthday approached, I found myself increasingly drawn to memories of that neighborhood, of Sarah and David, of the life we had shared. My room in the assisted living facility had become a shrine of sorts to those connections, photographs covering every surface, Sarah's hiking boots still positioned by the door as if waiting for one more adventure, David's toolbox tucked beneath my bed. "You have quite the collection," my caregiver, Elena, remarked one morning as she helped me with my medication. Were all these people family? I smiled at the question. "Yes," I said simply. "Not by blood, but by choice." Elena nodded in understanding. "Those are the strongest bonds sometimes." That evening, as I dozed in my armchair, I dreamed of our street as it had been in the beginning, David tending his garden, Sarah organizing her library books on the porch, neighbors calling greetings across lawns. In the dream, I walked among them, but they couldn't see me. I was both present and absent, observer and participant. When I woke, twilight had fallen. Through my window, I could see the desert sky painted in shades of purple and gold. Without thinking, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I still knew by heart, the number of what had once been Sarah and David's house. A woman answered, her voice unfamiliar yet somehow right. "Hello? I'm sorry to bother you," I said, suddenly aware of the strangeness of my call. "My name is Alex. I used to live next door, many years ago." There was a pause, then, "Alex? The Alex from the book?" I was momentarily confused. "Book?" "Our street," she explained. "The previous owners left us a copy when we bought the house. Your stories are throughout it. About Sarah and David, and all the others." A warmth spread through me at the thought of our memories being passed down like heirlooms, from family to family. "Yes," I said. "That Alex. This is incredible," she said, her voice animated. "We've lived here for 3 years now. The whole neighborhood still talks about all of you, especially at the block party. We've kept the traditions going." "The sunset watches?" I asked, hopeful. "Every special occasion," she confirmed. "And we've maintained the little free library too. Your friend Sarah started it, right?" "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She believed books could save lives. They saved hers, after David died." We talked for nearly an hour, this stranger who lived in the house where my dearest friends had once lived, where I had spent countless evenings, where a grieving woman had once found the courage to keep living. She told me about the neighborhood now, how some things had changed while others remained remarkably the same. How the stories of those who came before were still told, still mattered. Before we ended the call, she asked, "Would it be all right if I shared your number with some of the other neighbors? I think they'd love to talk with you too." "I'd like that very much," I said. In the weeks that followed, I received calls from various residents of my old street, some living in houses I had known intimately, others in homes built after my departure. Each conversation was a bridge between past and present, a reminder that communities outlive individuals, that stories continue beyond their original tellers. On my 95th birthday, Elena helped me set up a video call with the entire neighborhood. They had gathered in what had once been Sarah and David's backyard, setting up a large screen so everyone could participate in the celebration. "We have a surprise for you," said the woman who now owned their house. The camera panned to show a small stone bench installed beneath the old oak tree, the tree David had planted the year after they moved in. A simple plaque read, "In memory of Sarah, David, and Alex, who taught us the meaning of neighborhood." "But I'm still here," I protested, laughing through tears. "We know," she said warmly. "But your legacy is already with us. We wanted to honor that." They sang, "Happy Birthday," these strangers who felt like family, and then asked me to tell them a story, any story, about the neighborhood as it once was. I chose to tell them about that rainy night, about Sarah's knock on my door, about the simple request that had changed everything. As I spoke, I could see in their faces the recognition of a universal truth, that we are all, at some point, either the person knocking or the person answering, either the one asking, "Can you stay?" or the one saying, "Yes." The greatest gift we can give each other is presence, I concluded. Sarah taught me that. David lived it. I've tried to pass it on. You have, someone called from the back of the gathered crowd. More than you know. 2 months after my birthday, I fell ill with pneumonia. As I lay in the hospital bed, drifting between consciousness and dreams, I found myself once again walking the streets of that neighborhood, not as it was now, but as it had been when we were all there together. Sarah and David waited for me at the end of the block, looking just as they had in their prime, she with her librarian's reading glasses perched on her head, he with his tool belt slung low on his hips. "There you are," Sarah said, smiling that smile I had missed for so many years. "We've been waiting." "Am I dying?" I asked, feeling strangely calm about the possibility. David shrugged in his characteristic way. "Does it matter? We're here either way." I looked back at the street, at the houses where we had lived our ordinary, extraordinary lives. "I'm not ready to leave it all behind," I admitted. "You don't have to," Sarah said gently. "That's what I was trying to tell you all those years ago. What we build together, the connections, the love, the moments of being truly present for each other, that outlasts us. It becomes part of the foundation," David added, gesturing toward the houses. "Others build on it, but it's still there. Always." I woke to find Elena sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. "You were talking in your sleep," she said. "Something about foundations." "Just visiting old friends," I told her with a smile. Against the odds, I recovered from the pneumonia, though it left me weaker than before. As spring turned to summer, I spent most of my days sitting in the garden of the assisted living facility, watching the desert bloom in its subtle, persistent way. One afternoon, a staff member approached with an envelope. "Special delivery," she said. "All the way from your old neighborhood." Inside was a thumb drive and a note explaining that the current residents had compiled videos of the street through the seasons, along with messages from everyone who now lived there. "So you can visit any time," the note concluded. That evening, Elena helped me set up the videos on my tablet. For hours, I wandered virtually through the place that had been home for so much of my life. I saw Sarah's little free library, now painted a fresh blue and yellow. I saw David's workshop, converted to an art studio but still housing some of his old tools. I saw the bench with our names, surrounded now by a garden of wildflowers. And I saw the people, new faces in familiar spaces, creating their own stories while honoring ours. Children played in yards where other children had played decades before. Neighbors gathered on porches for evening conversations. Life continued its beautiful cycle. The final video was from the woman who lived in Sarah and David's house. She sat on their back porch, her back porch now, with the sunset painting the sky behind her. "We wanted you to know that the story continues," she said. "The chapter you and your friends wrote was beautiful, and it inspires the chapter we're writing now. Thank you for showing us what it means to truly be neighbors, to stay when staying matters most." In my 97th year, as my strength continued to fade, I made a decision. With Elena's help, I began recording my own stories, not just of Sarah and David, but of all the connections that had shaped my long life. The neighborhoods I had known, the people who had knocked on my door in various ways, the times I had said yes to staying and the times I had asked others to stay for me. "What will you do with these recordings?" Elena asked as she helped set up the equipment each day. "Send them back to the street," I said. "Add them to the story." Day after day, I spoke into the recorder, weaving together the narrative of a life lived in connection with others. I talked about Sarah's grief and courage, about David's generosity and joy, about the countless small moments that had created our shared history. "The most important things are often invisible," I said in what would be my final recording. "The foundations beneath the houses. The roots beneath the trees. The love beneath the ordinary days. We don't see them, but they hold everything else up." On a warm evening in early autumn, just shy of my 98th birthday, I asked Elena to help me outside to watch the sunset. The desert sky was particularly magnificent that night, streaks of crimson and gold stretching across the horizon, fading to deep purple overhead. "It's beautiful," Elena remarked, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. "Every one is different," I said, remembering David's words from so long ago. "That's what makes them precious, they're beautiful, and they're temporary." As the last light faded from the sky, I closed my eyes, suddenly overwhelmingly tired. In that space between wakefulness and dreams, I heard a knock, 3 soft taps, just like on that rainy night so many decades ago. When I opened my eyes, Sarah stood before me, looking just as she had when we first met. Behind her was David, his smile as warm and welcoming as ever. "Can you come with us now?" Sarah asked, extending her hand. I looked back at the life I had lived, the connections made, the love given and received, the presence offered when it mattered most. I had stayed as long as I was needed. I had told the stories that needed telling. I had passed on what Sarah and David had taught me about what truly matters in this world. "Yes," I said, taking her hand. "I'm ready." In a neighborhood across the country, a family gathered on their back porch to watch the sunset. The woman who lived in what had once been Sarah and David's house checked her phone and gasped softly. "What is it?" her husband asked. "Alex passed away," she said, showing him the message from the assisted living facility. Peacefully, watching the sunset. They sat in silence for a moment, honoring the passing of someone they had known only through stories and brief conversations, yet who had shaped the community they now called home. As darkness fell, the woman stood and walked to the little free library at the edge of their yard. From her pocket, she took a small, handmade bookmark with a quote carefully written upon it, **, we're all just chapters in each other's stories. The trick is to make your chapter worth reading. **. She slipped the bookmark into a novel, a story about neighbors and friendship and the courage to begin again after loss, and placed it prominently on the library's shelf. "Good night, Alex," she whispered. "Thank you for staying." As she walked back to her family, a gentle rain began to fall, 3 soft taps on the roof, like a knock at the door. And somewhere, in a place beyond time and space, 3 friends sat together on a porch, watching a sunset that would never end, their story complete yet continuing in the lives of all they had touched, a legacy of presence, of connection, of saying yes when it mattered most. For in the end, that is how we all live on, not in monuments or achievements, but in the hearts we've touched, the lives we've shared, the moments we've stayed when staying was hard but necessary. That is how love endures. That is how we all, eventually, come home.